It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be with you today here at the annual general meeting of Dóchas. And Susan at the beginning introduced that we're going to hear about the big vision. I'm not so sure about that. There are visioning parts in it, what I'm going to present, but there's still a lot of questions. And I think when the more I'm engaging with this issue of reimagining or transforming INGOs, the more it becomes clear to me, firstly, it's a marathon. It's nothing where we can quickly develop a vision of that's the next state and then just move there. It's about a process where we, in iterations, have to learn where to move and how to get there. And so this process perhaps was a little contribution for the Irish space, at least. Let's see that. But this is, again, more about questions and triggering conversations and not at all about giving answers. So I see many from the participants have been engaged in the process, but others have not. And so just shortly about the process. Dóchas is currently preparing for a new strategy to cover year 22 onwards. And one of the ambition really here was to have a collaborative, participatory approach to contribute towards that strategy. So this is not the strategy at all. The strategy is going to need to respond to this process and to the conversation that we are having today. This process was about understanding challenges and opportunities of the rapidly changing context for Irish INGOs and imagine some possible future for the Irish INGOs. It also was about strengthening relationships and identify opportunities to work together. And we reached, in the first phase of interviews, we reached 34 people, some with one-on-one interviews and for others with interview circles. So they interviewed each other and we got the transcripts. And then in the second phase of 3 sessions of 2.5 hours each, as Susan pointed out, we had 40 people. And all those that were critical friends, some critical friends of Dóchas, some members of the sector as well. I would like to state that what we lacked in the entire process was voices from the South, or sufficient voices from the South. So it's just interesting to reflect upon, we tried, but we didn't manage. And that also tells something about the sector. So again, that's especially great, that Nana, that you're here with also with the kind of the survey of voices from the South that you brought in. And the elements that we looked at in the process was, what are the driving forces of the changing context? We kind of got that out, we synthesized that from the interviews. Then in the workshops, we looked at what are the opportunities arising from that? What is the best possible future for Irish INGOs? That's when Susan and others had to build something with their hands, a model of the best possible future. And then we looked at what needs to change to get there. What do we need as a sector to start, to stop? What do we need to continue doing? But I'm not going to bother you with kind of explaining all that in a lot of detail. But I want to talk on 5 themes that stood out for us from this entire process. There's a report kind of that describes in all the steps, but for now I want to really focus on 5 themes that stood out. And I'm going to try to not repeat things because Nana, you were touching on a lot of things already. Susan, you touched a lot of things on already, and Rory as well. So I'll try to stay within what's perhaps not has been said so explicitly yet. And most of what I'm presenting is really very, very close to what people have said during the process. It's either post-its they have written or quotes. So we want to stay as close as possible to what people directly said. And we synthesized that to 5 themes. The first theme is around locally led development, and that's perhaps not too a surprise when I listen to others that have spoken already. I think what stood out for me here is, and I'm actually going to talk about COVID, is that many people in the process said COVID demonstrated that a lot can be done without INGOs being present, without also us Irish INGOs being present on the ground. And digitalization really enabled this. So the local NGOs, the local civil society organizations, they were the one still being able to reach local communities, and it worked. The second thing that stands out for me here is the unclear implications. So yes, there is a call for localization or locally led development. It's very loud and it's growing, but it's also there for a long time already. And the sense that I got from the conversations in the workshops was we are stuck to a degree in how to implement it and how to respond to this agenda, and what are really the implications in terms of risk sharing and in terms of compliance. How can we share risks with local partners easily when they operate in a context of oppression sometimes? So it's risky for them to be very visible at times. So we need to look at the nuances, and we don't quite know how to respond to that. And in terms of opportunities, what stood out for me is here build generally equal North-South civil society partnerships. And what that really means, because we can talk about that, but what are the real implications? For example, when we partner with a Southern organization to apply for funding together, are we really sharing the decision-making power equally? Are the funds somehow equally shared? Is also so often the Northern organization can take some of that funding for covering overheads, while the Southern, in terms of the regulations that comes with the funding, is often not able to do that. How can we cater for that? So really looking into the nitty-gritties and better understanding that. The question that really stood out for me then from at the end of the workshops was, how could a space look like where the sector can learn and think together how to address locally led development responsibly and really learn together. The second theme that stood out during the process was on diversity, inequality, and decolonizing structures. And I want to read out this quote here. The global trend towards addressing inequalities and to be actively anti-racism is going to require members to respond. Saying that we are Irish and we didn't colonize anybody is not enough. We need to get serious about the coloniality within development and the work of our organizations. And yes, there was there's an awareness or a recognition by many that we engaged with that there's a lack of diversity within the Irish INGOs, as pointed out in the chat earlier as well, across all levels, but specifically also talking about leadership positions and in boards. And at the same time, when we look down there, what to stop doing, the first thing, we need to stop thinking diversity is just about race or color. It's about ensuring equality of voices and representation. And the opportunity on the right top here, really people thought is to really going beyond just the conversation, also just basically fixing race or color within our boards. We need to look that beyond that and really interrogate how our organizations and structures could look like to really represent equality. And the question here yeah, is what is the shift in mindset that is needed? And also what is holding us back? Many of that not new, but what is holding us back to really understand that very well with each other and to engage with that self-reflection. The third theme that I want to point out is around courageous advocacy. And Susan touched upon that as well, kind of in terms of courageous leadership. So there was a strong sense for a need for a stronger and more confident and courageous leadership, advocating for our cause from a sectoral rather than an organizational perspective. And yes, there was also a call for speaking with one voice, but there was also quite some critical reflection about that call for one voice, with seeing that there's also risk of groupthink if we think that we all need to speak with one voice. So that the reflection more went into the direction, yes, let's bring our voices together, but let's also start to allow for more diversity in our voices and live with that diversity. The success story of Ireland co-chairing the Agenda 2030 process with Kenya was very alive still for many in the sector. And so the whole opportunity to, or longing to connect to connect your advocacy work with global agendas, and really also there cooperate with other networks outside of Ireland. Rory mentioned the European level, so to connect with European other networks to amplify the voice. And Rory actually touched upon that question here as well already, how to do advocacy when unrestricted funding is so constrained. So yes, professionalism versus agency versus local ownership, but also how can we really be brave in our advocacy? And when you look at START, the last point, be brave and name the fundamental issues when there are obviously funding restrictions or yeah. The next theme that stood out was collaborative learning culture. And that really was a theme that got more energy I felt during the 3 workshops. And you can just see that in terms of stop, start, and continue. There's just a lot that came out of the workshops in this regard. So on the one hand, yes, there was a recognition Irish NGOs are competing for funds, attention, and talents, which often results in distrust and high competition. When looking on that from an outside perspective, it seems like that's almost a natural status. Or as Rory said, there will never be enough funds, perhaps, right? So it's a natural characteristic of the system that you are competing for funds, attention, and talents. At the same time, there was really a strong willingness shown during the process to collaborate more systemically, and to have a system where we all take action together and bring in our complementary strengths and capabilities. And also longing for a more innovative, less risk-averse culture that accepts failure as a precondition for learning. So that's really all around the internal culture within organizations in the sector. Opportunities that people saw was really to use the COVID disruption to permanently change the way we work, to not go back to how we worked before the pandemic, but really reflect about what's the positive things that we currently are learning that we can bring into the futures as well. And the question that I would leave you with regarding this theme is, how can we incentivize collaboration within the network in a time of digitalization when we often feel we have to beg people to attend events and workshops? So the organizational work always comes first, and there was a feeling at the beginning of our process here together where Dóchas said, we don't know if people are going to come to our workshops, to these workshops. I mean, the interesting thing is we had 40 people throughout those workshops, and that was more than anticipated. But still, it's a challenge, and I just wanted to also mention the working groups were here really appreciated as something, a container where this collaborative learning is already happening. The last theme is around accountability and governance. It was mentioned before already by the other speakers. Yes, there are growing requirements around transparency, safeguarding, accountability. And what we also heard is that for many of the small organizations in the sectors, it's sometimes difficult to keep up with all those requirements and set up comprehensive governance structures. It just takes resources. And so in the start area down here, we see develop standard models around compliance and governance. Yes, that's really something we should start or continue doing as a sector, as Dóchas as well. What is interesting for me is also this quote here, which says that we're running from one scandal to another, and we need to move beyond the crisis mode when it's about accountability and governance. There is an opportunity to really proactively establish world-class internal accountability and governance systems so that we can move beyond this crisis mode and really get ahead of the curve, basically. And the question is, how could that look like? And perhaps one last thing here is the reputational risks through social media. So social media platforms are really amplifying the risks for reputational damage to the sector. If one organization is under attack, it has implications for the entire sector. And I think that's where I would leave you with. It just was striking for me when I saw the word cloud at the beginning, that justice was in the middle throughout. And I found this, and it reminded me of a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. And I think it fits also to this change process that you have ahead of yourself. And he said, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands out against love. I will post it in the chat as well. That's kind of the three things really coming together that enable transformation: power, love, and justice. You need to connect to your power, to your love, but you need to use your power as well wisely in order to make progress towards justice. So it was really a pleasure. I'm excited about the questions. I wasn't able to read the chat while I was talking. It was a pleasure to engage with so many of you during this process, and I'm curious about the conversation that we're going to have now as well.